Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward.
And discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience.
Welcome back to a new episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we are glad to be back home, and we're going to be having a quality conversation, aren't we, Bret?
A conversation on quality or a quality conversation?
I think it's
both. Or a quality conversation on quality.
All of the above.
Sounds great.
But, in reference to quality and clothing, there is a lot of talk about quality, and rightly so. It can be quite challenging, however, especially understanding that quality means something different to everybody.
Yeah, certainly, though. There are some defined parameters of quality, which we'll go into later. But, quality in some cases is subjective, depending on the level of, in our business, the level of which clothing is produced for what particular market. There's different discerning tastes or different expectations for quality. And so, while there is some, quite a bit of subjective nature, when you get all the way down to fiber, quality of fabric being used, there is some basic quality parameters that customers can identify, even though that they're not professionals. And so, our hope is that we can dialogue a little bit about that today and provide some clarity for people that are trying to discern decisions for their own particular brand or line on things to create expectations for.
So understanding there's such variance when it comes to defining quality and different expectations, how do you go about quantifying and qualifying quality with regards to garments?
Yeah, I think first it begins on your demographic, the place that you kind of exist in the marketplace. What is your customer going to be looking at with respect to quality and the expectation for the particular garment? If you're in a kind of moderate to better space, if you add performance to that, there's some exceeding higher levels of demand that those garments are going to have to go through to achieve the quality expectation that customer is going to have. So first of all, certainly it's quantifying, your customer and the space in which they live in.
Right. So there's making sure you understand the expectations of your customers. And then there's elements to consider in the actual development cycle of the garment.
Sure. So, in particular, quality is going to examine certainly fabrics, finishes, treatments, and trims. In trims, we include the sewing thread and the way that the garment is sewn together. All those different areas have different levels and expectations of quality for different customers.
Are there standards, universal standards for measuring quality?
There is. So when you're looking at fabrics, there's independent lab tests that we at Stars go through on all of our product, but a lot of the industry does, the established part of the industry. And, it starts from pretty basic items like shrinkage, which you would expect, right? People don't want to get a garment, throw it in the washer and dryer, and it become half the garment. We've all dealt with those issues. Color fastness. So color fastness on a fabric, we've heard those stories. You get a red T-shirt, you're wearing it, you get in a rainstorm, you jump in your car, you got beige seats, and now you got pink seats. So that becomes an issue. The color bleeds off onto the garment, and that's, in essence, that color consistency or color durability, that's called wet crocking in that particular situation. So when a dye stuff gets wet, it'll have a different inherent result than when it's dry in some cases. So we test for both of those to ensure that. Color fastness after washing, how quickly it fades. Some dye stuffs inherently fade quicker and some are more permanent, again, based upon the expectation of the individual garment and demographic. And then after that, and we'll dive into that in a little bit, there's final garment inspections. And there's organizations around the world that, in our case, we use UL, but there's very good organizations, and we've worked with most of them, that provide independent inspectors that will go in and create a test to define what that final garment, the result of the sewing and the execution of that garment looks like before the garment shipped, hopefully.
Yeah, it's good to have that unbiased opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
So I've heard different terms thrown around: quality assurance, quality control. What's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, sure. So quality assurance is simply a test or a review to ensure that the steps of what you've put in place along the way are executed in the final product. Because you can't inspect in quality. You can certainly at the end stage, once the garments are done, you can edit out pieces that don't meet quality, but you can't really change quality at that point. So that's quality kind of assurance. Quality control begins throughout the production. And there's many steps of that that ensure that the quality control along the way is maintained. So quality assurance is kind of just a fait complete, right?
So kind of following the garment more throughout the cycle of it coming together, as opposed to waiting till it's done. And it's done.
Absolutely.
Okay. So knowing that so much of this really lies on the factory, how do you ensure, when you're selecting a factory partner, how do you ensure that they are quality focused?
I think it's first asking questions. Secondly, it's following up to make sure that that's happening. Additional considerations like we have at Stars, we have our own QC teams that are active in the factories, ensuring that that the factories execute on their promise for quality. Some of the questions you ask are, how many independent inspectors are in the line, how the lines are set up, and what do they do when a sewer has a bad day, that creates defects, how that's created, where are the inspection station points along the way, what are they managing in terms of inline inspection? And I'll use a term that we'll dive into a little bit later that might be unknown to some people, but are they managing an AQL level, kind of an associated quality level, in line? And for some of the better organizations, they tighten that inline inspection to what we call a 1.5 AQL. And again, we'll go into that detail later, but it's a very tightened inspection. So as garments are going through production, there's people monitoring in line every day to ensure that if all of a sudden a sewer is not sewing something particularly well, or they're not changing a needle and it's creating needle holes or whatever else, hopefully they're catching that at the point, reducing the amount of quality defects that are coming out of the line.
And reducing waste as a result,
For sure,
right?
Most certainly.
So you mentioned AQLs, acceptance quality limits. Again, where do these standards come from? What's considered acceptable in the industry?
Yeah, so that's, again, a pretty big parameter depending on the particular customer. We've met a number of them that really don't actively inspect production. They kind of hope and expect the factory will do their job. The factory, in some cases, depending on the factories that are used, might provide their inspection, report. And sometimes that's sufficient for a particular production level. There's a lot of information in the industry that quality defects run somewhere between 10 and 20% as an overall industry, which is higher than you'd expect. But remember, some of those quality defects are not really noticeable to the end customer.
Okay.
So we lump all that in together in terms of things that are less than perfect. No production is perfect.
Well, it's humans,
I would say. Yeah, we're using humans in most cases. Some of that's changing. But I think industry levels are somewhere between 10 and 20%. And as you're kind of analyzing that for a particular, a particular business, you want to improve on that for sure.
Right, yeah. So what are some of those defects? Like, what are various categories of defects? I mean, knowing that those numbers are what they are, what are the key areas to look at? And what's considered acceptable?
Sure. So again, some companies will call out what they consider majors and minors. Those are the two main classifications. There's also one called critical. So critical rarely, thankfully, happens today. At least in our factories. I haven't seen it a number of years because there's things put in place to avoid that. But a perfect example of a critical failure would be when they're sewing and needle breaks, that needle gets lodged into a garment and you're making kids wear.
Oh my gosh,
You can understand how that could be a problem, right? Sharp needle, causes the child some damage. So you don't want any of those, right? So that's laid in as a critical defect. If there is a broken needle and that's found in the inspection, global inspection rules indicate that the entire shipment is failed and the entire thing has to go through re-inspection. So you think about that and you go, holy smoke, that would be a big task, especially on larger production.
Yeah.
Most factories today have what's called needle detectors.
Okay.
So you can actually pass garments through if the needle detector is calibrated properly. And the garments can still be packaged, but you can pass them through. And if there's any metal in the garment itself, now there's some issues with that on outerwear and others, but you can actually calibrate for a needle, and once it goes through, the alarm would go off and you'd know that particular garment has a broken needle in it. So there are ways to speed up that re-inspection. For the other two categories that we mainly deal with, called majors and minors, the best way I can explain it is that while there are lists for organizations to look at particular defects, I'll give you the definition as I see it. Majors are something that a average customer that is not in our industry, just a normal consumer
right.
Gets a garment, opens it up, tries it on, brings it home, notices there's something wrong with the garment, and returns it. So that's kind of the easiest definition. So that could be today that's a little more gray, but if we say a hole in the garment, right? Unless it's intentionally a grind hole on a denim pant, but a long story there. But unintentional holes, thread coming undone,
Sure.
things like that. Those are really considered majors. And the majority of the lists that I have seen to date are majors. Like there's a comprehensive list. If any of those happen, that's considered a major defect. Minor defects are something that we in the industry or the factory would say, boy, that could be better.
It's an expert eye.
An expert eye, but a consumer would never, ever see the defect,
Give me an
return it, or
example.
exchange it.
What
Loose thread on the inside of a garment that might have a little bit longer thread, not trimmed properly.
Okay.
Right? And some companies, depending on the level and caliber of their product, they're going to move that from a minor to a major. There is some movement, but I would say typically, depending on the length of that thread, right? If it's attached to a sewing bobbin or something, that's probably an issue. But if it's just a little bit longer on that trimming than it should be, a lot of customers would just think, I'm going to trim it off and I'll be fine.
Right.
So those are really considered minor. So those are the three major categories in a quality assurance inspection that occurs.
I bet, with you having that expert eye as a shopper, that's really changed the way that you buy garments.
I would say the biggest thing that I noticed today, certainly I would notice some defects. I don't go on the inside and look at things because there is no such thing as a perfect garment today. It doesn't exist. Perfect production is not a reality. Okay? I could find a defect in almost every garment that exists. Mine really comes down to fabrication. That's kind of the hidden quality conversation that people don't really dive into too much, and that's where that subjectivity exists. So if I pick it up and I see discoloration in the dyeing, some people might not notice it. I certainly do. If the tactile hand is really dry, if I see uneven surface in terms of pilling due to less quality cotton yarns or different fibers, those are the things I really pick up on after the years that I appreciate if it's done well.
Right. Based on the category of garment, does that change the way that you would measure defects or quality?
Boy, I would tell you that majors and minors today, for anyone that's doing active inspections, these kind of majors and minor defects in terms of sewing or holes or slubs or flaws or whatever else, are pretty universal. Even quote, discount stores that are doing mass production and pretty well organized, they have manuals and they call it those majors and minors. They might be more relaxed if there's a fabric slub or flaw and it's not in the front quadrant. We call this kind of the the most important quadrant, which is on the front, visible to the consumer. Maybe it's on the back tail. They might have some relaxed rules about fabric flaws that upper end brands, moderate to better brands, might not. So I would say that, in that respect, there's some movement in conversation about quality.
Are there any common misconceptions that people might have, thinking that if they see this particular thing, they think it's a major defect and it's really not, or vice versa?
That's a good question too.
See, it's all about quality conversations here.
Is, and the subjectivity of it. I can certainly think back to a few case examples. So there was a big trend today or the last few years, quite a few years, in burnout. So burnout is a technique that you have a blend, a cotton and a poly blend, and you take a certain chemical process and you can actually burn out cotton or you can burn out poly, and it gives this very distressed look.
Oh yeah, really nice hand feel too.
Great hand feel, kind of a distressed look, fashion kind of step. And depending on the level of quality and which one you're burning out and the amount that you're burning out, what is left over, because it continues to happen throughout the life of the garment on burnout, is these little fluffs of fiber, because you've actually damaged the construction of the garment. So over the life of the garment, that just continues to fall out over washing. And when you pull it on, there have been situations where people pull it on, they see this little fuzz and they're like, wow, that's an issue. But it's actually kind of the result.
Part of the aesthetic.
Yeah, part of the aesthetic and part of the result. But you can understand there's a bunch of that fuzz and it's red, people might be concerned. And there's probably a number of examples like that. Pigment dyed garment wash kind of things, if there's uneven color. In pigment dye garment wash, the intent is to be discolored, right? And so those things in general are some customers, they say, oh, that's so uneven. And you're like, well, that's kind of the creation of the design for it.
Are there any other insights that would be valuable in this conversation?
I think in the end inspections, when you're running general AQL tables, and we'll probably have a download for that. We
do. In fact, we have a download that shares, kind of outlines some standards, points of inspection, defects, benchmarks, and some example of reports of opportunities that you are being measured and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think when you're taking a look at quality, understanding what, the major industry players view quality levels like, what is an AQL table? Because a lot of people don't understand it, and they won't till they look at it. How we move from an AQL in majors at 2.5 and minors at 4.0. What's a AQL level table level 2? What does that mean? What's the sample size? What's the expectation of the percent of defects in a shipment? All of those things can become a lot more readily apparent when you start to look at a true kind of overall AQL table and take a look at some of the detail there. And I think it prepares brands and retailers, et cetera, that aren't familiar with AQL, what to expect and what to request when they start to implement quality assurance programs. And then certainly, I think, super important to vet the factory with quality control, because if you have a factory that's not producing something well and you think you're just buying it cheaper, the result in a 1 to 5 star society like today, we have immediate feedback. So if the customer's not happy, then you're going to have major issues. It's hard to overcome a 1 to 2 star rating when you're selling things online. In the old days, and I mean old days, there really wasn't a lot of formation in quality levels, and you'd get all sorts of things, but it was one customer that might be dissatisfied, and other customers, there's not this community of jurors in terms of quality as there is today.
Yeah, I can see the real importance of having processes in place, especially because it's not like it's really easy to hop on a plane and go, check the factory in while the production is happening and so forth, making sure you've got the right partnerships in place, good processes to measure it are just vital to the success of the entire.
Especially today. And I think in some cases, people that are just stepping in the business, they kind of oversimplify manufacturing. I can go to this particular online site and Bob makes knit garments, and I'm going to go place it with Bob, and I'm going to get what I expect. You've got to lay in very clear directions with what we call tech packs. And for those in the industry, they're going to be fully familiar with those. Making sure those tech packs are detailed enough that you're outlining the parameters in which you expect the result to be, and then implementing quality along the way so that the assurance is going to come out the way that you want it, and making sure that you're partnering with people that have experience and have success along the way with quality.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider, a lot of terms that you tossed out today that, even though I'm in the industry and hear these this in conversation nearly daily, there's still things that can be challenging to get your brain around. So we do have that download that's available that kind of walks through in great detail. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach on out. And also, make sure to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.
Thank you.